Nobody builds something that big underground just for fun.
Nobody knows where all the stone went that was excavated from this place, and you're talking about tons and tons and tons of stone that had to be removed from each one of these places. And if you can get a sense of scale here of how big this place is, you're talking about 24 caves in total. This is just one.
Whomever constructed Longyou Caves had advanced knowledge on par with today's technology.
The most King Tut tomb reveal moment that I can imagine.
And I can't even begin to imagine, there's no records on it, I can't even begin to imagine what this might have been used for. Maybe they used it for what some of these are being used for today. They filled it with water and put giant fish in here and used it as breeding.
Or maybe something happened and then we were so scared it would happen again, we created, that's like an ancient survival. And it's like, you don't do that unless you have to.
Right.
You don't burrow like a human.
Okay, there are a lot of mysteries here, and I'm just gonna say, if you're looking for answers, you came to Odd Salon unknown.
Chapter 1. The Mystery of the Longyou Caves. For thousands of years, the Longyou Caves remained lost to time and history. No one even knew that such a cave existed. But all that changed one day when one curious local of the Shiyan Beicun village decided to put a popular legend to the test. Everyone who grew up in Shiyan Beicun knew about the legend of the bottomless ponds. They were these small water bodies, about 5 of them, scattered all over the village and rumored to have depths that ran as deep as an ocean. For years, villagers would stare in complete bewilderment as they tried to locate the floor of the ponds using long sticks, only to find that the pond just kept going downwards, seemingly without end. Then one day, someone in the village caught a really huge fish that only lives in deep waters, making people wonder just how deep the ponds are. A man called Wu Anai decided it was time to get to the bottom of these legends, once and for all. On June 9th, 1992, Wu and I gathered 3 other villagers with him and led the charge to pump all the water out of these so-called bottomless ponds. What he discovered after close to 3 weeks of non-stop pumping, however, turned out to be a lot different than what he bargained for. The bottomless ponds did, in fact, have a floor just as Wu and I suspected. The floor was just completely different from anything the farmer had in mind before he set out to uncover the depths of the pond. After completely draining out one of the ponds, Wu Anai was stunned to find a skylight rooftop with a cavernous man-made cave just underneath. We're talking about an 11,000 square foot space with an intimidating height of 98 feet, or the same height as a 10-story building. Imagine that level of height for a pond. Now pause for a moment and imagine you were Wu Anai walking into these caves, officially becoming the first modern man to step your foot into this unexplainable phenomenon. The first thing that catches your eyes are these tool marks on the walls of the cave. Everywhere you look, from the walls to the pillars to the roof, parallel lines have been drawn, following the exact same pattern. You wonder if you're looking at code, or if this is just someone's really weird art taste. Then as you continue to take quiet steps further and further into the cave, not sure who or what lives here, you notice the pillars. From your count, there are only a few of them in the cave, each about 50 centimeters thick. That's quite thin, and it makes you wonder how the roof of this place hasn't caved in already. Which leads you to your next puzzle. Just how long has this cave been standing here? And here is where it gets strange. Going by appearances alone, this cave looks like it could have been built yesterday. Everything looks to be in pristine condition. No sign of damage anywhere. But then you wonder, if this cave was built recently, how come you never heard of it before now? No myths, no folktales, no legends, nothing. Shiyan Beicun is a small village after all, and such a massive project would definitely have been impossible to keep a secret. So, how come no one knows about this place? While you chew on that, your eyes travel up to the stairs. The stairs look weird in that they are much steeper than traditional stairs, almost like they were made for giants. But before you can make sense of that, other interesting features start to catch your attention, like the stone chambers, the bridges, the gutters, the pools, and the fact that there are 23 other caves just like this one. When word finally got out about the Longyou Caves, experts from all around the world arrived at the scene, ready to decode the answers they believed were hidden within the cave's walls. Unfortunately for them, the Longyou Caves had no plans to give answers, only to ask more riddles. Archaeologists who have worked on the Longyou Caves all agree that these caves were most likely built around the Western Han Dynasty. Now, that ran from 206 BC to 23 AD, which would put the construction of these caves around 2,000 years ago. But what makes it even weirder is that no single record exists for the construction of these caves. I'll tell you what I mean by that later in the video. For now, however, there's another riddle we need to figure out first. And that riddle is, how were these caves built in the first place? How were the Longyou Caves built? As engineers from all over the world examined the Longyou Caves, they all arrived at the same conclusion. Constructing these caves took a high level of craftsmanship and precision. There are no mistakes to be found anywhere at all, whether in the architectural design or in the execution of the plans. Each of the caves takes the form of an elegant hall, with 4 parallel walls that each feature distinct edges and extremities. One side is always steep, and the opposite side is always at a 45-degree incline. For each cave, there is only one entrance, which leads to a vertical shaft where the staircase fits. And from this entrance, both sunlight and rain can get into the caves. But in what can only be understood as an effort to manage the water influx, the builders of this cave included a network of drainage groves and channels at the base of the caves. They also installed a water catch system, which led to a very bewildering observation. The primitive people who built the Longyou Caves seemed to have a highly sophisticated understanding of water management, drainage, and hydrology. But how? And that's not even all. The accuracy of the overall construction and the uniformity of design across all 24 caves is uncanny, especially when you consider the fact that these caves are not interconnected. Archaeologists have pointed out that builders in one grotto of the Longyou Caves would not have been able to see what their peers were doing in the very next grotto to them. This means that for the caves to be as precise and as identical as they are, the architects would have had to make use of highly sophisticated measuring equipment along with extremely detailed architectural plans. But even at that, human beings are not infallible. So, even if we can confirm that they did have these two things when building the Longyou Caves, it does not make the caves anything less than an engineering marvel. What isn't clear is why the builders found it necessary to create so many identical caves in such a little space without linking them somehow, or why they chose to go the difficult route of chiseling away at the caves when they could have saved time and effort with more effective tools, like a pick or some random blunt object. And since we're on the topic of excavation, scientists estimate that about 1 million cubic meters of stone, equivalent to nearly half of the Pyramid of Egypt, was excavated to build the Longyou Caves. Which brings us to the next riddle. Where are these stones? Once again, no single trace of them anywhere. They are not around the caves, and we don't see them in any of the buildings close to the area. So, did someone make them disappear? How did the builders work in the dark? Whoever built these caves had to do all of their work underground. Now, the way the cave is built, sunlight can only enter at a certain angle, and it's not even a lot of sunlight. As Jia Gang, an expert in civil engineering at Tongji University, explains, the cave's entrance is very narrow, and sunlight could only enter the cave at a specific angle and time. As one progresses deeper into the cave, the light dims. Visibility is typically poor at the bottom of the cave, typically dozens of meters from the entrance. This means that for the builders to get any work done down in those caves, not to talk of the top-tier craftsmanship we can find in the Longyou Caves, they'd have had to use an alternative light source. The problem is, electricity had not been invented at the time these caves were built. Now, naturally, you'd think that these guys must have made use of torches then. But that's the other weird part. There are no soot marks anywhere on the caves. Not on the roof, not on the walls, nowhere at all. So, did these guys just work in the dark? Or was there some supernatural force at work? Because these caves don't look like they were built by people birdboxing it. And it's not just their impressive appearance, it's also how these caves have managed to maintain their structural integrity for so long. How have these caves managed to maintain their structural integrity for millennia? The Longyou Caves aren't the only large, ancient man-made caves to be discovered. Archaeologists have discovered many, but most didn't hold up due to water erosion. For instance, the Bet Guvrin quarry in Israel and the Wieliczka salt mine in Poland are two caves that share many similarities with the Longyou Caves. All three are man-made, large, and shallow buried. But unlike the Longyou Caves, the other two have suffered significant damage and structural failures since they were discovered. The Longyou Caves, on the other hand, look like they were just built yesterday, even though they've had to endure floods, disasters, and conflicts in the centuries since they were built. Of course, the mysteries don't end there. In fact, we're about to look at the two biggest mysteries that have left experts all over the world completely confused. And the first is that there is no historical record that the Longyou Caves ever existed at any point in time. No historical record of the Longyou Caves. Okay, so here's where we are. We've got 24 vast caves whose architectural design and construction are way ahead of their time. We don't know who built them or how they built them. But even more confusing, no one from history seems to have even known that these caves existed because there are literally zero records of their construction anywhere in the world. Obviously, this is weird, but what makes it even more weird is the fact that these caves were built in China, very likely during the Han Dynasty. Anyone who knows anything about the Han Dynasty knows that they were compulsive record keepers. So, it's completely bizarre that they don't even have one record of a project as massive as the construction of the Longyou Caves. For perspective, research shows the dynasty kept extensive and highly detailed records of their cultural activities. Just to give you an idea, the Yuefu or Music Bureau kept detailed descriptions of the music of the day along with the instruments involved, the songs, and the musical techniques. Even the dances used for temple rituals were recorded down to the movements of the dancers and the musicians. If the dynasty didn't think it was overkill to keep detailed records of theatrical performances, then they definitely could not have just forgotten to record the construction of the Longyou Caves. Something else has to be at play here. Again, consider other history-defining historical sites that have been discovered in China. The Terracotta Army is a good one. This army of life-sized terracotta soldiers and horses that had been buried for over 2,000 years were discovered in 1974. But thanks to records and other historical footprints, it wasn't very difficult for scientists to link these terracotta figurines to Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, who ruled around 221 BC. Then you have the Great Wall of China, another marvel of engineering. But once again, we have all the details of how this 13,000-mile-long wall was built across millennia, as well as all the different emperors involved. We even have details we'd rather not know, like how about 4,000 people died while building the wall, and some were even buried within the wall itself. Why then would someone commission such a spectacular project like the Longyou Caves, and there isn't even one mention of it in history? I mean, just to excavate the rock alone, scientists say that it would have required the work of 1,000 people working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 6 years straight. And we haven't even taken into account the extraordinary care and precision that the sculptors put into making these chisel marks. And yet there are no records that this project ever happened. Were the records destroyed out of malice? Which, to be fair, happened a lot in ancient China. But even if the records were destroyed out of malice, were the destroyers so thorough that they were able to destroy every single bit of information possible about these caves? Or could it be possible that the reason no historical records of Longyou Caves exist is because even back then, no one knew about these caves? Anyway, before we poke that bear, let's go on to the final mystery of the Longyou Caves. Why were the Longyou Caves built? Till today, science has no answer to the question of why the Longyou Caves were built. Many theories have been proposed, some outlandish, some probable. But when examined further, each of these theories keeps falling short in one aspect or another. The main stumbling block that scientists keep hitting are these parallel lines, these tool marks that have been inscribed into every surface of the caves. Obviously, doing this must have taken the builders enormous time and effort. But they did it anyway for each of the 24 caves, almost as if they didn't have a choice, and these lines just had to be drawn. But what purpose did these lines serve? Did they just undergo this labor-intensive work for the aesthetics? Is this code, or do the lines serve a functional purpose? Once again, no one knows for sure. All we have are theories, which brings us to the second part of this video. Chapter 2, the Longyou Caves Theories. The Longyou Caves are such a megalithic enigma that there are dozens of theories surrounding its origin, existence, and purpose. So, for the sake of time, we will only focus on the most popular and the most plausible theories. Our first theory will focus on the construction of the Longyou Caves, while the others will focus on the purpose of the caves, where we have seen the most controversies. That said, let's get to it. Theory 1, built by an ancient civilization with lost tech. Some have said that the Longyou Caves were constructed using machinery because manual labor alone could not have achieved such an impressive feat of engineering. And this is a really interesting point because when you compare the tool marks on the walls of the Longyou Caves to the marks made by modern-day mining and tunneling machines, the resemblance is uncanny to say the least. Could this be the work of an ancient civilization with advanced technology that has now become lost to time? The Anunnaki, perhaps? By now, we all know that the Sumerians who lived in ancient Mesopotamia were leaders when it came to human civilization. Nearly all history-defining milestones that humans have met were first accomplished in Sumer. Writing, agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, science, medicine, military, city planning, schools, transportation, and, yes, building, all originated in Sumer. And Sumerians credit the Anunnaki for all of these advancements. Now, if you think about it, this theory would perfectly explain why there are no historical records of the construction of the Longyou Caves. Because they were not constructed 2,000 years ago, but rather 6,000 years ago, by an advanced race of beings who gave humankind all the advances in development that we currently have. This means that the Han Dynasty did not build the caves, or even know about the existence of these caves, which is why, even though they were compulsive record keepers, they did not record the construction of the Longyou Caves. They didn't know about the caves. Theory 2, a palace. The sheer majesty of the Longyou Caves have led some to believe that the place might have been built as a palace or as unique living quarters for an emperor. This could explain the painstaking labor involved in making all the patterns on the walls, the massive space, and all the sophistication that went into building the caves. Looking at the Longyou Caves, you get the sense that no expense was spared in executing this project. And that would make perfect sense if an emperor had ordered it built as a palace for him. Theory 2. Emperor's tomb or religious site. One interesting thing to note about the Longyou Caves is that they were built below what we now know as Fenghuang Hill. And this is important because the Fenghuang is a sacred and highly revered creature in Chinese mythology. As you can see, the Fenghuang closely resembles a phoenix. But here's the part that's important to us. This bird symbolizes the union of yin and yang, as well as the 6 celestial objects, which include the sky, the sun, the moon, the wind, the earth, and the planets. Not only that, the Fenghuang is also associated with royalty and rebirth, which might suggest that the Longyou Caves were built under the Fenghuang Hill because the location was considered auspicious. This wouldn't be surprising because in ancient times, important projects were built on carefully selected sites. It could be that the people who built the Longyou Caves believed that the Fenghuang Hill contained special divine energy that would make their rituals acceptable or help their dead have a peaceful transition into the afterlife. Theory 3. Storage. Dr. Chu Liangkai of Zhejiang University speculates that the Longyou Caves were excavated under the command of Emperor Xuan of the Western Han Dynasty. According to his theory, the emperor wanted warehouses built in border countries in order to store food, goods, and weapons in the event of a war. Theory 4. Military hiding place. Now, this theory has 2 camps. Some say that the Longyou Caves were used as a secret location for military strategizing. As the story goes, a certain emperor in China's history wanted to make covert war plans and keep his soldiers hidden. So, he ordered the Longyou Caves built. The other camp disagrees slightly with this narrative. According to Yang Hongxun, a researcher at the Institute of Archaeology of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, the Longyou Caves were built in 494 BC under the command of King Gujian. Hongxun speculates that Gujian had just suffered a crushing defeat in battle. So he had the Longyou Caves built so that he and his soldiers could hide from the shame of their defeat. Theory 5. Cisterns. Now, this theory is one that has recently started to gain popularity among experts and armchair archaeologists. And to be fair, of all the theories around the Longyou Caves' purpose, this one seems like the most likely, even though the theory's logic has its own fatal flaw as well. To begin with, the very shape of the Longyou Caves makes them excellent choices as cisterns. The bottom of the cave is very large to hold as much water as possible, but the top is quite narrow to reduce how much water gets lost from evaporation. Granted, that's not enough to go on. But get this. Around 200 BC, when the Longyou Caves are believed to have been constructed, the world experienced a global drought. But it gets even more interesting. Engineers who have investigated the Longyou Caves say that the caves were able to maintain their structural integrity for so long because they were filled with water. In other words, the water held the roof of the caves up and kept them from caving in. Which is why the government had to have some support installed for the roof of the caves, now that all the water has been pumped out. Could this be the final nail in the coffin of the Longyou Caves mystery? Well, not so fast. As I told you before, this theory has a fatal flaw, just like all the other theories we've examined so far. Let's go over them one after the other. Critical responses to Longyou Caves theories. That the Longyou Caves were built nearly 6,000 years ago by an ancient civilization with lost tech honestly seems like a very credible theory. It would explain the highly sophisticated engineering involved in building the caves, why the caves are not in ancient Chinese records, and all the tool marks on the walls of the caves. Unfortunately, the consensus is that those tool marks were made by hand, not by machinery. In fact, take a look at this mason making the exact same marks on stone using a chisel, and then look at a picture of the Longyou Caves. They are identical. The marks on the Longyou Caves might look like the same marks made by modern-day machinery, but experts who have taken a closer look at the marks all agree that the marks on the Longyou Caves were made by hand. How else would you explain how some chisels were found in one of the caves during excavation? And by the way, if these marks were made by hand, then it indirectly debunks the Anunnaki theory. Because the Anunnaki were gods with super advanced knowledge on literally everything. Why would they build the Longyou Caves by hand? And yeah, the Anunnaki building, the Longyou Caves, might explain why the Chinese have no record of the construction of these caves. But it does not explain why there are no myths or legends about these caves anywhere in history. Did the Anunnaki just build these massive caves for man without telling us about it, or even leaving any clue? As for the purpose of the Longyou Caves, most of the popular theories perish on the altar of the fact that the caves were completely empty when discovered. There was nothing in any of the caves that could suggest activity of any kind. This rules out the palace theory, the tomb theory, and the sacred site theory. The Longyou Caves couldn't have been any of those because, try as they may, archaeologists just couldn't find any evidence of habitation. Also, there were no grave goods, no artifacts that could have been used for religious rituals, no antiquities, nothing. So, then maybe it could have been a military hiding place? Wrong again. Wartime is a very fast-paced time. No king would pause in the middle of the war to undertake such a huge project in the name of preparing for war. It doesn't make strategic sense. First, the emperor loses many able-bodied men to the construction work when they could be serving in the army. Secondly, these caves took years to build. If an emperor really ordered the construction of the caves as a strategic move, he and his army would have been long destroyed before the caves were completed. Plus, there's no way a construction project this massive would have been kept a secret. So, if the plan was to build a covert staging area, that plan would have failed before it even started. Moreover, as I already said, there are no signs of anyone living in any of the caves. Perhaps the storage theory is the weakest of all the theories. It just doesn't make sense to store food and weapons in a cave that easily gets filled with water when it rains, which leaves us with the cistern. Maybe the Longyou Caves were cisterns? Well, there are still quite a number of question marks, even with this theory. The biggest one being, why were the chisel marks made all over the caves then? Why go through all that stress carving these lines by hand if the caves are just going to be used as cisterns? Also, why go through such great lengths to make 1 million cubic meters of excavated stone go poof? And what about the stairs? Since a cistern will always be full of water, why include stairs? Obviously, that's a weird feature to include if you're actually building a cistern. Except maybe the Longyou Caves weren't made to hold water at all. Maybe they were built with an entirely different goal in mind. You've seen the caves, you've heard the theories. Did I miss something?